Hi, this is Dr. Pasion-Gonzales, and this is the video lecture for week 5. Okay. Now, in the module, there's a video from Revel that does a very good job of highlighting some of the ideas for classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So they frankly do a much better job than I would in terms of highlighting some of those differences. So go ahead and please take a look at that video to give you some more insight into that. So one of the things that I want to do today is I just want to highlight one very specific aspect of operant conditioning that I really want you to make sure that you grasp onto well. So with operant conditioning, we have two factors going on. We have reinforcement versus punishment, and we have positive versus negative. So if you read the material this week, you know you can have positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, but also positive punishment and negative punishment. Here's what I need you to understand. Reinforcement is always about increasing a behavior. Punishment is always about decreasing a behavior. That's the goal of reinforcement and punishment. With positive and negative, think about these not in terms of good or bad, but think about it more from a mathematical perspective. Positive being giving and negative being taking away. Okay? So in positive reinforcement, you're giving something desired so that the behavior will increase, or you can take away something negative to increase the behavior, which is called negative reinforcement. So negative isn't bad. Negative is just you're taking something undesirable away. The same thing with punishment. Punishment can be positive punishment, which is giving something undesirable to stop the behavior, or negative punishment, taking something positive away to stop the behavior. Now, this whole topic of operant conditioning is huge in terms of application to your everyday life. In all of your relationships, with your family, with your children, with your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, with your pets, with your friends, operant conditioning is so crucial. You really want to get a good handle on this. Think about this for a second. Any legitimate animal trainer doesn't use punishment, they use reinforcement. And they use reinforcement not just because it's the nice, warm, fluffy approach, but because it works really, really well. Okay, reinforcing a behavior you want to increase works so much better than punishing someone when they don't do what you want them to do. Let me give you a couple of small examples in my life. So we have a couple of dogs in our house, and every once in a while they will run out the front gate. Not often, but sometimes they will. What I figured out a long time ago is when I call the dogs back when they leave, I want to use the exact same voice that I would use if I was calling them to give them a treat or to pet them or to take them for a walk, right? Because I want them to associate the sound of my voice with something positive, with something good, right? So that when I call them, they're always going to come back to me knowing that they're not going to get scolded or hit, but that they're going to get petted or that they're going to get a treat. Okay. By the way, when my boys were away from college, I used the exact same idea when they would call. Night or day, doesn't matter what was going on. When my boys called, I wanted the sound of my voice to be inviting and warm, and so that they always knew I'm happy that you called. And first of all, I am happy they called. Secondly, I want them to associate the sound of my voice to a good positive conversation, because I don't want them to fall into the same trap that many families do where their children don't want to call their parents. Does that make sense? So this is all based on this idea of reinforcement. Okay. Last example. Just so you know, my wife is also a psychologist, and she and I have actually done presentations on parenting and couples communication and even the value of reinforcement. And I'll tell you, she is better at this than anybody I have ever met in my life, right? She is better at reinforcement, at making sure when you do something that she wants you to continue, that she lets you know with a smile, a thank you, a hug. And after all this time, I know what she's doing. I know she's just trying to shape my behavior, but I got to be honest with you. I don't care. I still want to feel those warm fuzzies from my wife. And so I will go out of my way to get her a glass of water or get something off the top shelf or whatever it is, small things, right? Because I know that she will never miss the opportunity to tell me that she appreciates what I do. And I'm a sucker for this. I love to hear it. I want to hear it, so I will always do those things for her. So I just want to emphasize with all of this, reinforcement, this stuff works really, really, really well. Use it, master it, and you'll see a difference too. I want to use the rest of our time today to talk about Martin Seligman. Now, he's mentioned briefly at the end of chapter 5, but I just want to give you a little bit more of in-depth thoughts about him because his contribution to psychology, I think, is tremendous, and I'll tell you why. Whereas in most of psychology is built around the idea of making people less miserable, less depressed, less anxious, and that's a big deal. We psychologists and therapy should be about that. However, Martin Seligman, he fathered this different approach that people have come to call positive psychology, and it's really not about affirmations and warm and fuzzy self-talk, but it's really more this idea that how do we thrive in this world? How can we not just not be miserable, but how do we actually be content and happy and optimistic and look forward to our life? So it's really about making our lives better, not just about making our lives not miserable. And I like that. So one of the studies that is listed in the book is really interesting, and it has to do with this idea of learned helplessness, right? So if you remember, there's a dog that they placed in a cage, and they set it up so he was unable to leave the cage even if they shocked the bottom of the cage, right? And they did this often enough where they actually trained the dog to believe that no matter what the dog did, there was no way that he was going to be able to avoid the electric shock. Okay, so they trained him to be helpless. And then they took the same dog, put him in a cage where there's no top, it's a very low wall, so the dog could easily jump out. Okay, so when the floor was shocked, because of the previous training, this dog didn't jump out of the cage. And with any other dog, if you put them in this cage and shock the bottom of it, they will absolutely jump out of the cage. They do that instinctively. So what Seligman figured out is you actually have to train a dog to believe that they are helpless to get them to not respond, to not even do the basic fundamental things to take care of themselves. I remember when I first read the study, this was mind-blowing to me because I've always looked at helplessness and these kinds of negative attributes as characterological, that some people are just that way. But Seligman made a compelling argument that people like dogs can be trained to be helpless. So Martin Seligman spent several years after that trying to figure out, well, if you can train a dog or a person to be helpless, can you train them to be resilient? And the answer seems to be yes, absolutely. Now, one of the main characteristics that he found is really helpful when it comes to training someone to be resilient, to be able to bounce back from difficult circumstances, is optimism. Optimism is fundamental to resilience. So it's interesting to me, during his studies, one of the things that he began to look at is how do optimists view struggles or challenging situations differently than pessimists. And what he found is there's a very interesting difference of how pessimists look at failures, for example, compared to optimists. For example, if you have a pessimistic person who tends to think pessimistically, and they fail a test, okay, their explanation for why they failed a test tends to be personal, tends to be permanent, and pervasive. They might say things like, oh, I failed this test because I'm so stupid, right? It's permanent, it's personal, and it's pervasive. I'm stupid, not I failed this test, but my explanation is, well, I failed the test because I'm stupid. Now, optimists, he found, when they fail a test, they do just the opposite. They attribute the failure more to the situation, more to external factors that can and that are specific to that situation. So someone who's an optimist might say, yeah, I failed this test in this class, but I'll get the next one. So it's interesting that pessimists and optimists also flip those explanations when it comes to successes. A pessimist, if they do very well on a test, will say things like, well, yeah, I did well on that test, but I just got lucky, right? So their explanations are situational and specific and not personal. An optimist, when they do well, now they attribute that to, I knew I could do it, I must be really smart, or it confirms how they already think about themselves, okay? Now, the last point about Seligman is he makes it clear that positive self-talk and affirmations really isn't very effective. That's not the thing that makes a difference for optimism versus pessimism. What he says is when we don't engage in that negative self-talk, that permanent, personal, pervasive self-talk, that's the key factor that helps us avoid those negative thinking traps and help us to stay in a positive enough mindset to perform well, to stay at a task longer, to hang in there until we're able to be successful. Because none of you will be surprised to know that any successful person in almost any arena, they have to be willing to stay with it, right? Even fail multiple times in order to be good enough to finally reach their goal. Seligman is a nice reminder to me, and I hope to you, that it's not so much the positive things we say, but we really have to avoid those personal, pervasive, permanent, negative statements when we fail so that we can hang in there until we can be successful. Read the chapter and take those Revel quizzes all the way through the chapter. There's a Canvas exam at the end that is going to be due Sunday night at 11:59. And look at that video in this week's module. It's very good. It's very helpful. And if you have any questions, email me or catch me at my office hours Tuesday nights at 7 o'clock. Okay? All right, y'all. Look forward to talking to you soon. Bye now.